Hope everybody's cozy. Everyone's been having a good stream so far. Make sure everybody's had their water, some snackies, and we're nice and relaxed and just having a good time. We've seen the trailer. We know the premise of the story. But do we know the universe? Do we truly know the characters? Do we understand the reasoning behind them? I don't think so. We're going to be diving into Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson, the Olympian. Book 1. A Lightning Thief. Uh, let's see. Page 1. I accidentally vaporize my pre-algebra teacher. That is our chapter title. Look, I didn't want to be a half-blood. If you're reading this because you think you might be one, my advice is close this book right now. Believe whatever lie your mom or dad told you about your birth and try to lead a normal life. Being a half-blood is dangerous. It's scary. Most of the time, it gets you killed in painful ways, nasty ways. You're a normal kid reading this because you think it's fiction. Great. Read on. I envy you for being able to believe that none of this ever happened. But if you recognize yourself in these pages, you feel something stirring inside, stop reading immediately. You might be one of us. Once you know that, it's only a matter of time before they sense it too. And they'll come for you. Don't say I didn't warn you. My name is Percy Jackson. I'm 12 years old. Until a few months ago, I was a boarding student in Yancey Academy, a private school for troubled kids in upstate New York. Am I a troubled kid? Yeah, you could say that. So, right off the bat, I was correct. They're 12. I could start at any point in my short, miserable life. Prove it. But things really started going bad last May when our sixth grade class took a field trip to Manhattan. 28 mental case kids and two teachers on a yellow school bus heading to Metropolitan Museum of Art to look at ancient Greek and Roman stuff. I know, it sounds like torture. Most Yancey field trips were. Yeah, exactly, Luna. Oh, okay, that's why it's like that adaptation trailer we watched is not good. However, they re-released a TV show with everyone being the proper age and all that good jazz. Well, that'll be a Discord thing. But where was I? Let's see. Mr. Brenner, our Latin teacher, was leading this trip. So I had some hopes. Mr. Brenner was this middle-aged guy in a motorized wheelchair. He had thinning hair and a scruffy beard, in a frayed tweed jacket, which always smelled like old coffee. You wouldn't think he'd be cool, but he told stories and jokes, let us play games in class. He also had this awesome collection of Roman armor and weapons, so he was the only teacher whose class that didn't put me to sleep. I hoped this trip would be okay, at least. I hoped for once I wouldn't get in trouble. Boy, was I wrong. See, bad things happen on field trips. Like in my fifth grade school, when we went to the Saratoga battlefield. Saratoga? Ah, either way. When we went to the Saratoga battlefield, I had this accident with the Revolutionary War Cannon. Wasn't aiming for the school bus, but of course, I got expelled anyways. Before that, my fourth grade school, when we took a behind the scenes tour of the Marine World shark pool, I sorta hit the wrong lever on the catwalk, and our class took an unplanned swim. The time before that, well, you get it. This trip, I was determined to be a good student. Yeah, I read that right. All the way into the city, I put up with Nancy Bobafett, freckly, red-headed kleptomaniac girl, hitting my best friend group back with the head of. Gonna redo that 1 second. All the way into the city, I put up with Nancy Bobafett, freckly, red-headed kleptomaniac girl, hitting my best friend Grover in the back of the head with chunks of peanut butter and ketchup sandwich. Thank you for my glasses. That ought to help. Grover was an easy target. He was scrawny. He cried when he got frustrated. He must have been held back several grades because he was only a sixth grader. He was the only sixth grader with acne and the start of a wispy beard on his chin. Hmm. Sorry, was getting a bit hydrated. On top of all of that, he was crippled. He had a note excusing him from PE for the rest of his life because he had some kind of muscular disease in his legs. He walked funny, like every step hurt him, but don't let that fool you. You should have seen him run when it was enchilada day in the cafeteria. Anyways, Nancy Bobafett was throwing wads of sandwich that stuck into his curly brown hair. And she knew I couldn't do anything back to her because I was already on probation. The headmaster had threatened me with death by in-school suspension if anything bad, embarrassing, or even mildly entertaining happened on this trip. Ugh, gonna kill her, I mumbled. Grover tried to calm me down. It's okay. I like peanut butter. He dodged another piece of Nancy's lunch. That's it. I started to get up, but Grover pulled me back into my seat. You were already on probation, he reminded. You know who'll get blamed if anything happens. Looking back on it, I wish I decked Nancy Bobafett. Ooh, the music pickup. Oh yeah, let me get that up. Because page flip. Yeah. Looking back on it, I wish I'd decked Nancy Bobafett right then and there. An in-school suspension would have been nothing compared to the mess I was about to get myself into. Mr. Brunner led me into led the museum tour. He rode up front in his wheelchair, guiding us through this big, echoey galleries Has marble statues and glass cases full of really old black and orange pottery. It blew my mind this stuff had survived for 2,000, 3,000 years. He gathered us all around 13-foot stone column with a big sphinx on the top. Started telling us how it was a grave marker. Steel. Or Stele? Stele. I'm gonna go with steel for this. A steel. For a girl about our age. He told us about the carvings on the side. I was trying to listen to what he had to say because it was kind of interesting. But everyone around me was talking, and every time I told them to shut up, the other teacher, chaperone, Mrs. Dodds, would give me the evil eye. Mrs. Dodds was this little math teacher from Georgia who always wore a black leather jacket even though she was 50 years old. She looked mean enough to ride a Harley right into your locker. She had come to Yancey halfway through the year when our last math teacher had a nervous breakdown. Her first day, Mrs. Dodds loved Nancy Bobofit and figured I was the devil spawn. She would point her crooked finger at me and say, "Now, honey," real sweet. I knew I was gonna get another after school detention for a month. One time, after she made me erase the answers out of old math workbooks until midnight, I told Grover I didn't think Mrs. Dodds was human. He looked at me real serious and said, "You're absolutely right." Mr. Brunner kept talking about Greek funeral art. Finally, Nancy Bobofet snickered something about the naked guy on the steel. Maybe it is Stell. Yeah, we'll go with Stell. I think Stell sounds more accurate now that I'm looking at the naked guy on the side of the Stell. And he turned around and said, "Will you shut up?" It came out louder than I meant it to, but the whole group laughed. Mr. Brunner stopped his story. "Mr. Jackson," he said, "did you have a comment?" My face was totally red. I said, "No, no, sir." Mr. Brunner pointed to one of the pictures on the stele. "Perhaps you'll tell us what this picture represents?" I looked at the carving, felt a flush of relief because I actually recognized it. "That's Kronos eating his kids, right?" "Yes," Mr. Brunner said, obviously not satisfied. Might have put a wrong tone on that. Let me redo that. Yes. "Yes," Mr. Brunner said, obviously not satisfied. "And he did this because, well, I racked my brain to remember. Kronos was the king god, and God?" Mr. Brunner asked. "Titan," I corrected myself. And he didn't trust his kids, who were the gods. So, Kronos ate them, right? But his wife hid baby Zeus and gave Kronos a rock to eat instead. And later, when Zeus grew up, he tricked his dad, Kronos, into barfing up his brothers and sisters. "Ew," said one of the girls behind me. And there was this big fight between the gods and the Titans, I continued. And the gods won. Some snickers from the group. Behind me, Nancy Bobofit mumbled to a friend, like we're gonna use this in real life. Like it's gonna Like it's going to say on our job applications, please explain why Kronos ate his kids. And why, Mr. Jackson, Brunner said. To paraphrase Miss. Oh, this is a quote, my bad. Mr. Brunner said. Paraphrase Miss Buffett's excellent question. Does this matter in real life? Busted, Grover muttered. Shut up, Nancy hissed, her face even brighter red than her hair. At least Nancy got packed, too. Mr. Brunner was the only one who ever caught her saying anything wrong. He had radar ears. I thought about his question and shrugged. I don't know, sir. Yeah, I see. Mr. Brunner looked disappointed. Well, half credit, Mr. Jackson. Zeus did indeed feed Kronos a mixture of mustard and wine, which made him disgorge his other 5 children, who, of course, being immortal gods, had been living and growing up completely undigested in the Titan's stomach. The gods defeated their father, sliced him to pieces with his own scythe, and scattered his remains in Tartarus, the darkest part of the underworld. On that happy note, it's time for lunch. Mrs. Dotts, would you lead us back outside? The class drifted off, the girls holding their stomachs, the guys pushing each other around and acting like doofuses. Grover and I were about to follow when Mr. Brunner said, Mr. Jackson? Ugh, I knew that was coming. I told Grover to keep going, then I turned toward Mr. Brunner. Sir? Mr. Brunner had this look that wouldn't let you go. Tense brown eyes that could have been 1,000 years old and had seen everything. Must learn to answer my question, Mr. Brunner. About the Titans? About real life. How your studies apply to it. Oh. What you learned from me, that is vitally important. I expect you to treat it as such. I will only accept the best from you, Percy Jackson. I wanted to get angry. This guy pushed me so hard. I mean, sure. It was kind of cool on tournament days when he dressed up in a suit of Roman armor and shouted, "Whoa!" and challenged us at sword point against Chalk to run to the board and name every Greek and Roman person who ever lived, and their mother, and what god they worshipped. But Mr. Brunner expected me to be as good as everybody else, despite the fact that I have dyslexia and attention deficit disorder. I'd never made above a C minus in my life. No. No. He didn't expect me to be as good. He expected me to be better. And I just couldn't learn all those names and facts, much less spell them correctly. I mumbled something about trying harder, while Mr. Brunner took one long sad look at the stele, like he'd been at his girl's funeral. He told me to go outside and eat my lunch. Time to hydrate real quick. Clearing my throat. I'm going to mute 1 second. All right. The class gathered on the front steps of the museum, where we could watch the foot traffic along Fifth Avenue. Overhead, a huge storm was brewing, clouds blacker than I'd ever seen for the city. I figured maybe it was global warming or something, because the weather all across New York State had been weird since Christmas. We'd had massive snowstorms, flooding, wildfires from lightning strikes. I wouldn't have been surprised if this was a hurricane blowing in. Nobody else seemed to notice. Some of the guys were pelting pigeons with Lunchable crackers. Nancy Boba Fett was trying to pickpocket something from a lady's purse. And of course, Mrs. Dodds wasn't seeing a thing. Grover and I sat on the edge of the fountain, away from the others, and thought maybe if we did that, everybody wouldn't know we were from that school. The school for loser freaks who couldn't make it elsewhere. Detention? Grover asked. Nah, I said, not from Brenner. Maybe I don't need to read the I said parts. Editing for myself. As I was saying. Not from Brenner. I just wish he'd lay off me sometimes. I mean, I'm not a genius. Grover didn't say anything for a while. Then, when I thought he was going to give me some deep philosophical comment to make me feel better, he said, "Can I have your apple?" I didn't have much of an appetite. I let him take it. I watched the stream of cabs going down Fifth Avenue. Thought about my mom's apartment, only a little ways uptown from where we sat. I hadn't seen her since Christmas. I wanted so bad to jump in a taxi and head home. She'd hug me and be glad to see me, but she'd be disappointed too. She'd send me right back to Yancey, remind me that I had to try harder, even if this was my sixth school in 6 years, and I was probably gonna be kicked out again. I wouldn't be able to stand that bad luck she'd give me. Mr. Brunner parked his wheelchair at the base of the handicap ramp. He ate celery while he read a paperback novel. A red umbrella stuck up from the back of his chair, making it look like a motorized cafe table. I was about to unwrap my sandwich when Nancy Boba Fett appeared in front of me with her ugly friends. Guess she got tired of stealing from the tourists. She dumped her half-eaten lunch in Grover's lap. Oops! She grinned at me with her crooked teeth. Freckles were orange, as if somebody had spray painted her face with liquid Cheetos. I tried to stay cool. School's counselor had told me a million times. Count to 10. Get control of your temper. But I was so mad, my mind went blank. A wave roared in my ear. I don't remember touching her, but next thing I knew, Nancy was sitting on her butt in the fountain screaming, "Percy pushed me!" Mrs. Dodds materialized next to us. Some of the kids were whispering, "Did you see? Water. Like, it grabbed her." I didn't know what they were talking about. All I knew was I was in trouble again. Soon as Mrs. Dodds was sure poor little Nancy was okay, promising her to get her a new shirt at the museum gift shop, etc., etc., Mrs. Dodds turned on me. This was a triumph, or there was a triumphant fire in her eyes, as if I'd done something she'd been waiting for all semester. Now, honey, I grumbled. Month erasing workbooks. That wasn't the right thing to say. Come with me, Mrs. Dodd said. Wait, wait, Grover yelped. It was me. I pushed her. I stared at him, stunned. I couldn't believe he was trying to cover for me. Mrs. Dodd scared Grover to death. She just glared at him so hard his whiskery chin trembled. I don't think so, Mr. Underwood, she said. But you will stay here. Grover looked at me desperately. It's okay, man. Thanks for trying, I told him. Honey. Now, Mrs. Dodds barked at me. Nancy Bubblefit smirked. I gave her my deluxe I'll kill you later stare. Then I turned my face to Mrs. Dodds, but she wasn't there. She was standing in the museum entrance, way at the top of the steps, gesturing impatiently at me to come on. How'd she get there so fast? I have moments like that a lot, when my brain falls asleep or something. The next thing I know, I've missed something, as if like a puzzle piece fell out of the universe and left me staring at the blank place behind it. The school counselor told me this was part of the ADHD. My brain just misinterpreting things. I wasn't so sure though. Following after Mrs. Dodds, I headed halfway up the steps, glancing back at Grover. He looked pale. He was cutting his eyes between me and Mr. Brunner. Like, he wanted Mr. Brunner to notice what was going on. But Mr. Brunner, just too absorbed in his novel, to notice. I looked back up. Mrs. Dodds disappeared yet again. She was now inside the building at the end of the entrance hall. She's gonna make me buy a new shirt for Nancy, I thought to myself. But apparently, that wasn't the plan. Followed her deeper into the museum. When I finally caught up to her, we were back in the Greek and Roman section. Except for us, the gallery was empty. Mrs. Dodds, she stood there with her arms crossed in front of her. And she was standing in front of this big marble frieze of the Greek gods. She was making this weird noise in her throat, like howling? Even without the noises, I would have been nervous, to say the least. It's weird being alone with a teacher, especially Mrs. Dodds. Something about the way she looked at the frieze, as if she wanted to pulverize it. You've been giving us problems, honey, she said. I just did the safe thing and said, yes, ma'am. She tugged on the cuffs of her leather jacket. Did you really think you would get away with it? The look in her eyes was beyond mad. It was evil. She's a teacher, I thought nervously. It's not like she's gonna hurt me. I- I'll, I'll try harder, ma'am. Thunder shook the building. We are not fools, Percy Jackson, Mrs. Dodd said. It was only a matter of time before we found you out. Confess, and you will suffer less pain. I didn't know what she was talking about. All I could think of was that teachers must have found the illegal stash of candy I'd been selling out of my dorm. Or maybe they'd realize I got my essay on Tom Sawyer from the internet without ever reading the book. And now they were just gonna take away my grade. Or worse, they were gonna make me read the book. Well, she just demanded. Ma'am, I don't. Your time is up. She hissed at me. The weirdest thing happened. Her eyes began to glow like barbecue coals. Her fingers stretched, turning into talons. Her jacket melted into large, leathery wings. She wasn't human. She was a shriveled hag with bat wings and claws and a mouthful of yellow fangs, and she was about to slice me to ribbons. Then, things got even stranger. Mr. Brunner, who had been out in front of the museum a mere minute before, wheeled his chair into the doorway of the gallery, holding a pen in his hand. "What-o, Percy!" he shouted, and tossed the pen through the air. Mrs. Dodd lunged at me. With a yelp, I dodged and felt the talons slash the air next to my ear. I snatched the ballpoint pen out of the air, but when it hit my hand, it wasn't a pen anymore. It was a sword. Mr. Brunner's bronze sword, which he always used on tournament day. Mrs. Dodds spun towards me with a murderous look in her eyes. My knees turned to jelly. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the sword. She snarled at me. "Die, honey!" Yeah, I'm going with that voice. I don't know. It sounded We'll see. And she flew straight at me. Absolute terror ran through my body. I did the only thing that came naturally. I swung the sword. The metal blade hit her shoulder and passed clean through her body as if she were made of water. Hiss! Mrs. Dodds was a sand castle and a power fan. She exploded into yellow powder, vaporized on the spot, leaving nothing but the smell of sulfur and a dying screech of chill evil in the air, as if those two glowing red eyes were still watching me. I was alone. There was a ballpoint pen in my hand, but Mr. Brunner wasn't there. Nobody was there but me. My hands were still trembling. My lunch must have been contaminated with magic mushrooms or something. Had I imagined this whole thing? I went back outside. It was starting to rain, and I noticed Grover sitting by the fountain, museum map tented over his head. Nancy Boba Fett was still standing there, soaked from her swim in the fountain, grumbling to her ugly friends. When she saw me, she said, "I hope Mrs. Kerr whipped your butt." I said, "Who?" "Our teacher. Duh." I blinked. We had no teacher named Mrs. Kerr. I asked Nancy what she was talking about. She just rolled her eyes and turned away. Went up to Grover, and I had to ask him, "Where's Mrs. Dodds?" He just looked at me blankly and said, "Who?" He wouldn't look at me. So I thought he was messing with me. Not funny, man. This is serious. Thunder boomed overhead. I saw Mr. Brunner sitting under his red umbrella, reading his book as if he'd never moved. Making my way up to him, he looked a little distracted when he looked up. Ah, that would be my pen. Please bring your own writing utensil in the future, Mr. Jackson. I handed Mr. Brunner his pen. I hadn't even realized I was still holding it. Sir? Where's Mrs. Dodds? He stared at me blankly. Who? The other chaperone. Oh, my bad. The other chaperone, Mrs. Dodds. The pre-algebra teacher? He frowned, sat forward, looking mildly concerned. Percy, there is no Mrs. Dodds on this trip. As far as I know, there has never been a Mrs. Dodds at Yancey Academy. Are you feeling all right? And that is the end of chapter 1. I'm gonna take a second. We can discuss it a little bit. And I'm gonna hydrate. Oh. See, so the museum scene in the movie, or my bad, the trailer is completely different, right? Like that had such a more impactful tone and setting because you have this 12-year-old troubled kid on a class field trip and he's struggling to understand what is actually happening around him, and the people he thought he could turn to have no idea, quote unquote, what is going on. So now he's just in this state of, am I going crazy? And thank you guys, I appreciate it. it's a it's a bit different than what I normally do, but I'm enjoying it. Like I said, before we get into the next chapter, I'm just gonna hydrate and stuff like that. Crazy? I was crazy once. Mm-hmm. They locked me in a room. A rubber room. A rubber room with rats. Rats make me crazy. Alright. Oh yeah, I should probably update stream title. Uh, Turtles. So I got to hear the first chapter. Now I got to do the last 9 miles of going home, so I'm gonna hit a dead zone. Interesting to hear and see the difference in the scenes. See, that's exactly why I wanted to do it in the order that we did. Because now, instead of bearing through and struggling to watch the trailer and seeing all those scenes where it's like, ugh, this is so different, so bad. Now it's more like we can compare the two and have that dialogue, which is very just so good. Ugh. All right, Turtle's getting caught up on messages. He is drinking and stretching because he's been shrimping it up. And you're right, it changes things to know that the kids are so young in the book. It really does. Because it puts a little bit more of an impactness and seriousness on some of the scenes. It's like if they did Harry Potter, and instead of with the movies, us watching the kids grow, they had full grown adults trying to play the kids from the get go. And they tried to like adapt it to that. It's like, yeah, no, they were supposed to be like maybe juniors in high school. So like close to graduating. They could have been seniors, but yeah. Sounds good. Golden, drive safe. All right. Chapter 2. Three old ladies knit the socks of death. I was used to the occasional weird experience, but usually they were over quickly. This 24/7 hallucination was more than I could handle. For the rest of the school year, the entire campus seemed to be playing some kind of trick on me. Students acted as if they were completely and totally convinced that Mrs. Care, a pesky, or no, my bad, a perky, a perky blonde woman whom I'd never seen in my life until she got on our bus at the end of the field trip, had been our pre algebra teacher since Christmas. Every so often, I would spring a Mrs. Dodds reference on somebody just to see if I could trip them off. But they would just stare at me like I was psycho. It got so bad that I almost believed them too. That Mrs. Dodds had never existed. But Rover couldn't fool me. When I mentioned the name Dodds to him, he would hesitate, then claim she didn't exist. But I knew he was lying. Something was going on. Something had happened at the museum. I didn't have much time to think about it during the day, but at night, visions, Mrs. Dodds, talons, leathery wings would wake me up in a cold sweat. The freak weather continued, which didn't help my mood. one night, thunderstorm blew out the windows in my dorm. A few days later, the biggest tornado ever spotted in the Hudson Valley touched down only 50 miles from Yancey Academy. One of the current events we studied in social studies class was the unusual number of small planes that had gone down in sudden squalls in the Atlantic. I started feeling cranky, irritable, most grades slipped from D's to F's. I got into more fights with Nancy Bub friends. I was sent out into the hallway in almost every class. Finally, when our English teacher, Mr. Nicole, Nicole? Nicoll. I'm gonna go with Nicole for that one. Mr. Nicole asked me for the millionth time why I was too lazy to study for spelling tests. I snapped. I called him an old sot. I wasn't even sure what it meant, but it sounded good. The headmaster sent my mom a letter the following week, making it official. I would not be invited back next year to Yancey Academy. Fine. Just fine, I told myself. I was homesick. I wanted to be with my mom in our little apartment on the Upper East Side. Even if I had to go to public school and put up with my obnoxious stepfather and his stupid poker parties. And yet, there were things I'd miss at Yancey. The view of the woods out of my dorm window, the Hudson River in the distance, the smell of pine trees. I'd miss Grover, who'd been a good friend to me. Even if he was a little strange, I worried, you know? I didn't know if he'd survive next year without me. Oh, I'd miss Latin class too. Mr. Brunner's crazy tournament days and his faith that I could do well. And as exam week got closer, Latin was the only test I studied for. I hadn't forgotten what Mr. Brunner had told me about this subject being life and death for me. I wasn't sure why, but I started to believe him. The evening before my final, I got so frustrated. Threw the Cambridge Guide to Greek Mythology across my dorm room. Words started swimming off the page, circling my head, the letters doing 180s as if they were riding skateboards. There was no way I was going to remember the difference between Chiron and Charon, or ooh, Dices and Polydeuces. I'm sorry. The pronunciations of the gods' names are gonna be maybe a struggling point for me as a heads up. Um, I will do a little bit of research off stream pronunciations and stuff for the future. Let's see. And conjugating those Latin verbs. Forget it. I paced the room, feeling like ants were crawling around inside my shirt. I remembered Mr. Brunner's serious expression, his thousand-year-old eyes. I will accept only the best from you, Percy Jackson. I took a deep breath. Readjusting, sorry, 1 second. I took a deep breath. I picked up the mythology book. Never asked a teacher for help before, but maybe if I talked to Mr. Brunner, he could give me some pointers. At least I could apologize for the big fat F I was about to score on his exam. I didn't want to leave Yancey Academy with him thinking I hadn't tried. I walked downstairs to the faculty offices. Most of them were dark and empty, but Mr. Brunner's door was ajar. Light from his window stretching across the hallway floor. I was 3 steps from the door handle when I heard voices inside the office. Mr. Brunner asked a question. A voice that was definitely Grover's said, "Worried about Percy, sir." I froze. I'm not usually an eavesdropper, but I dare you to try not listening if you hear your best friend talking about you to an adult. So I inched closer. Alone this summer, Grover was saying. I mean, kindly one in the school. Now that we know that for sure, and they know too, we would only make matters worse by rushing him, Mr. Brenner said. We need the boy to mature more. But he may not have time. The summer solstice deadline will have to be resolved without him, Grover. Let him enjoy his ignorance while he still can. Sir, he saw her. His imagination, Mr. Brunner insisted. The mist over the students and the staff will be enough to convince him of that. Sir, I can't fail in my duties again. Grover's voice was choked with emotion this time. You know what that would mean. Haven't failed, Grover. Mr. Repeat that? Haven't failed, Grover. I should have seen her fox, or seen her for what she was. Now let's just keep worrying about Percy alive until next fall. Now let's just worry about keeping Percy alive until next fall. The theology book dropped out of my hand, hit the floor with a thud. Mr. Brunner went silent. My heart hammering. I picked up the book and backed down the hall. The shadow slid across the lighted glass of Mr. Brunner's door. The shadow of something much taller than a wheelchair-bound teacher, holding something that looked suspiciously like an archer's bow. I opened the nearest door and slipped inside. A few seconds later, I heard the slow clop, 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 like a muffled wood blocks. Then, a sound like an animal snuffling right outside my door. A large, dark shape paused in front of the glass, then moved on. A bead of sweat trickled down my neck. Somewhere in the hallway, Mr. Brunner spoke. Nothing. My nerves haven't been right since this winter solstice. Mine neither, Grover said. But I could have sworn. Go back to the dorm, Mr. Brunner. Got a long day of exams tomorrow. Don't remind me. The lights went out in Brunner's office. I waited in the dark for what seemed like forever. Finally, I slipped out into the hallway and made my way back up to the dorm. Grover was lying on his bed, studying his Latin exam notes like he'd been there all night. Hey, he said, all bleary-eyed. You gonna be ready for this test? I ignored him. Well, you look awful. Is everything okay? He frowned. Just tired. I turned so he couldn't read my expression. Started getting ready for bed. I didn't understand what I'd heard downstairs. I wanted to believe I'd imagined the whole thing. But one thing was clear. Grover and Mr. Brunner were talking about me behind my back. They thought I was in some kind of danger. The next afternoon, as I was leaving the 3-hour Latin exam, my eyes swimming with all the Greek and Roman names I'd misspelled, Mr. Brunner called me back inside. For a moment, I was worried he'd found out about my eavesdropping the night before. But that didn't seem to be the problem. Percy, he said, don't be discouraged about leaving Yancey. It's for the best. His tone was kind, but the words still embarrassed me. Even though he was speaking quietly, the other kids finishing the test could hear. Nancy Boba Fett smirked at me, made that sarcastic little kissing motion with her lips. Okay, sir, I just mumbled. I mean, Mr. Brunner wheeled his chair back and forth like he wasn't sure what to say. This isn't the right place for you. It was only a matter of time. My eyes stung. Here was my favorite teacher, front of the class, telling me I couldn't handle it. After saying he believed in me all year, now he was telling me I was destined to get kicked out? Right, I said, just trembling. No, no, Mr. Brunner said. Oh, confound it all. What I'm trying to say is, you're not normal, Percy. That's nothing to be. Thanks, I blurted. Thanks a lot, sir, for reminding me. Percy was already gone. On the last day of terms, I shoved my clothes into my suitcase. The other guys were joking around, talking about their vacation plans. One of them was going on a hiking trip to Switzerland. Another one was cruising the Caribbean, or Caribbean, whatever you prefer, for a month. They were juvenile delinquents like me, but they were rich juvenile delinquents. Their daddies were executives or ambassadors or celebrities. I was a nobody from a family of nobodies. They asked me what I'd be doing this summer, and I just told them I was going back to the city. What I didn't tell them was that I'd have to get a summer job walking dogs or selling magazine subscriptions. Spend my free time worrying about where I'd go to school in the fall. Oh, one of the guys said. That's cool. They went back to their conversation as if I'd never existed. The only person I dreaded saying goodbye to was Grover. But as it turned out, I didn't have to. He booked a ticket to Manhattan on the same Greyhound as I had. So there we were, together again, heading into the city. During the whole bus ride, Grover kept glancing nervously down the aisle, watching the other passengers. It occurred to me that he always acted nervous and fidgety when we left DNC, as if he expected something bad to happen. Before, I always assumed he was worried about getting teased, but there was nobody to tease him on the Greyhound. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. Looking for kindly ones? I said to him. Grover nearly jumped out of his seat. What? What do you mean? I confessed to eavesdropping on him and Mr. Brunner the night before the exam. His eyes began to twitch. How much did you hear? Oh, not much. What's the summer solstice deadline? He winced. Look, Percy, I was just worried for you. See, I mean, hallucinating about some demon math teachers? Grover. And I was telling Mr. Brunner that that you were overstressed or something because there was no such person as Mrs. Dodds, and 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 Grover, you're a really bad liar. His ears turned pink. From his shirt pocket, he fished out a grubbly business card. Just take this, okay? In case you need me this summer. The card was in fancy script, which was murder on my dyslexic eyes. But I finally made out something like this: Grover Underwood, Keeper, Half Blood Hill, Long Island, New York, 800 009 0009. What's half? Don't say it out loud, he yelped. That's my, summer address. My heart sank. Grover had a summer house. I'd never considered that his family might be as rich as the others at Yancey. Okay. So, like, if I want to come visit your mansion, can I? He nodded. Or, or, if you need me. Why would I need you? Came out harsher than I meant it to. Grover blushed right down to his Adam's apple. Look, Percy, the truth is, I kinda have to protect you. I stared at him. All year long, I'd gotten in fights, keeping bullies away from him. I'd lost sleep, worrying that he'd get beaten up next year without me. And here he was acting like he was the one who defended me. Grover, what exactly are you protecting me from? There was this huge grinding noise under our feet. Black smoke poured from the dashboard, the whole bus filled with a smell like rotten eggs. The driver cursed and limped the Greyhound over to the side of the highway. After a few minutes of clanking around the engine compartment, the driver announced that we'd all have to get off. Grover and I filed outside with everybody else. We were on a stretch of country road. No place you'd notice if you had, or if you didn't break down there. On our side of the highway was nothing but maple trees and litter from passing cars. The other side, across 4 lanes of asphalt, shimmering with afternoon heat, was an old-fashioned fruit stand. Stuff on sale looked really good. Heaping boxes of blood-red cherries and apples, walnuts and apricots, jugs of cider, and a clawfoot tub full of ice. There were no customers, just 3 old ladies sitting in rocking chairs in the shade of a maple tree, knitting the biggest pair of socks I'd ever seen. I mean, these socks were the size of sweaters, but they were clearly socks. The lady on the right knitted one of them. The lady on the left knitted the other. The lady in the middle held an enormous basket of electric blue yarn. All three women, all three women looked ancient, with pale faces, wrinkled like fruit leather, silver hair tied back in white bandanas, bony arms sticking out of bleached cotton dresses. The weirdest thing was, they seemed to be looking right at me. I looked over to Grover, say something about this, and he saw that the blood, or say something about this, and saw that the blood had drained from his face. His nose was twitching. Grover? Hey man, tell me they're not looking at you. They are, aren't they? Yeah, weird, right? Hey, you think those socks would fit me? Not funny, Percy. Not funny at all. The old lady in the middle took out a huge pair of scissors, gold and silver, long bladed like shears. I'm gonna skip this song real quick. Yeah, I think it's the Fates Golden. There we go. I think this one would be better. The old lady in the middle took out a huge pair of scissors, gold and silver, long bladed like shears. I heard Grover catch his breath. We're getting on the bus. Come on. What? It's 1,000 degrees in there. Come on. He pried open the door and climbed inside. I stayed back. Across the road, the old ladies were still watching me. The middle one cut the yarn, and I swear I could hear that snip across 4 lanes of traffic. Her two friends balled up the electric blue socks, leaving me wondering who they could possibly be for. Sasquatch or Godzilla? At the rear of the bus, the driver wrenched a big chunk of smoking metal out of the engine compartment. The bus shuddered. The engine roared back to life. The passengers all cheered. Darn right, yelled the driver. He slapped the bus with his hat. Everybody back on board. Once we got going, I started feeling feverish, as if I'd caught the flu. Grover didn't look much better. He was shivering and his teeth were chattering. Grover? Yeah? What are you not telling me? He dabbed his forehead with his shirt sleeve. Percy, what did you see back at the fruit stand? What, you mean the old ladies? What is it about them, man? They're not like Mrs. Dodds, are they? His expression was hard to read, but I got the feeling that the fruit stand ladies were something much, much worse than Mrs. Dodds. Just, just tell me what you saw. Well, the middle one took out her scissors, and she cut the yarn. He closed his eyes and made a gesture with his fingers. It might have been crossing himself, but it wasn't. It was something else, something almost older. You saw her snip the cord. Yeah, so? But even as I said it, I knew it was a big deal. This is not happening. Grover just started chewing at his thumbs. I don't want this to be like the last time. What? What last time? Always 6th grade. Never get past 6th. Grover, I said because he was really starting to scare me. What what are you talking about? Let me walk you home from the bus station. Promise me. That seemed like a strange request to me, but I promised he could. Is this like superstition or something? No answer. Rover, that snipping of the yarn. Does that mean somebody's gonna die? He looked at me mournfully, like he was already picking the kind of flowers I'd like best on my coffin. And that is the end of chapter 2. Oh, so again, they're missing out on like small little things. I mean, Percy just saw the fates and got a prediction from them, you know? Okay, perfect. I'm glad that you were able to hear most of it. That's why I tried to talk a little bit longer, so you would have time to come back. Oh, time to stretch. That is a very good point, Golden. Yeah, the book has the in the book he's at a boarding school. He's lower income still, and then yeah, in the movie that they have, he lives at home. You know, he's in public school, goes home, lives with the mom and the stepfather or the boyfriend or whatever. But yeah, in this one, it's he only gets to see, or he has only seen his mom at certain times. You know, he's bouncing around. So who knows if it's been different boarding schools potentially. So maybe he has, you know, he hasn't lived with her for the full time. And now that connection that he has with his mother, as we little bit of a spoiler and foreshadowing, since we know Hades is going to get involved. Now that connection and that drive to I need to save my mom makes more sense. Because I believe he's now heading home. Stuff is going to hit the fan. And then, yeah, we're going to get into chapter 3. I just, like I said, I like to discuss and stretch and stuff. Oh, I don't know why I was rapid blinking there. Hello. Had to walk from the truck to the house. A quarter mile. Oh my gosh, that is a long walk to the house. You know what? I'll actually take this time to go on a BRB as well so I can go use the restroom. I will be right back. Right. Ah, we are back. But I think we can make ourselves a little. There we go. Ah, let's see. Chapter 3. Grover unexpectedly loses his pants. Oh, it looks like I have a Discord message before we get into that. Oh, it's Otori. Oh, give me 1 second. I have something important going. I have a very important business message that came in. So we'll just sit here and vibe out to the music together for a second. Mm, all right, I responded. It looks like we might be good. I wanted to give them just a minute to potentially respond, but so they didn't. So we'll continue reading until they do. Confession time. I ditched Grover as soon as we got to the bus terminal. I know, I know, it was rude, but Grover was freaking me out, looking at me like I was a dead man. He was muttering, "Does this always happen? Why does this always have to happen in 6th grade?" Whenever he got upset, Grover's bladder acted up. So I wasn't surprised when, as soon as we got off the bus, he made me promise to wait for him. Then he made a beeline for the restroom. Instead of waiting, I got my suitcase, slipped outside, and caught one of the first taxis uptown. East 104th and 1st. I told the driver. A word about my mother. Before you meet her, her name is Sally Jackson. She's the best person in the world, which just proves my theory that the best people have the rottenest luck. Her own parents died in a plane crash when she was 5, and she was raised by an uncle who didn't care about her, or didn't much care about her. She wanted to be a novelist, so she spent high school working to save enough money for college with a good creative writing program. Then, her uncle got. Geez, I need to. My glasses, hold up. And then it looks like I just got a message back before we go to this next page. I do apologize. I know it's story time. Uh-oh. Doo-doo-doo. Oh, big stretches. How is everybody's night going so far while I'm answering this work message? Hope everyone's doing good. Or day. I know time zones do be wonky. Bum bum. You're doing good, Luna. You're better now that you're home in bed, Golden. How am I feeling? I'm doing all right. Just vibing. Oh, thank you for the head pats. All right. Got one of my bosses worrying. Well, uh, oh, a hint of snack? Oh, thank you. Do do do. do, do. All right, now we can get back to reading. I did pet one of the cats as well, Golden. All right, let's see. I'll backtrack a little bit so we know. She wanted to be a novelist, so she spent high school working to save enough money for a college with a good creative writing program. Then her uncle got cancer. She had to quit school her senior year to take care of him. After he died, she was left with no money, no family, no diploma. The only good break she ever got was meeting my dad. I don't have any memories of him, just this sort of warm glow. Maybe the barest trace of his smile. My mom doesn't like to talk about him because it makes her sad. He has no pictures. They weren't married. She told me that he was rich and important and the relationship was a secret. That one day he set sail across the Atlantic, some important journey, and just never came back. Lost at sea, Mom told me. Not dead, lost at sea. She worked odd jobs, took night classes to get her high school diploma, and raised me on her own. But she never complained or got mad. Not once. But I knew I wasn't an easy kid. Finally, she married Gabe Ugliano, who was nice at first for 30 seconds. Then he showed his true colors. A world class jerk. When I was young, I nicknamed him Smelly Gabe. Sorry, but it's the truth. The guy reeked like moldy garlic pizza wrapped in gym shorts. Between the two of us, we made my mom's life pretty hard. The way Smelly Gabe treated her, the way he and I got along, well, when I came home, it's a good example. I walked into our little apartment, hoping my mom would be home from work. Instead, Smelly Gabe was in the living room, playing poker with his buddies. The television blared ESPN. Chips and beer cans were strewn all over the carpet. Hardly looking up, he sat around a cigar. So, you're home. Where's mom? Working. Got any cash? That was it. No, welcome back. Good to see you. How has your life been the last 6 months? Gabe had really put on weight. He looked like a tuskless walrus in a thrift store clothes. He had about 3 hairs on his head, all combed over his bald scalp, as if that made him handsome or something. He managed the electromagnetics mega mart in Queens, but stayed home most of the time. I don't know why he hadn't been fired long before. He just keeps on collecting paychecks, spending the money on cigars that made me nauseous, and on beer. Of course, always beer. Whenever I was home, he expected me to provide his gambling funds. He called that our guy secret, meaning if I told my mom, he would punch my lights out. I don't have any cash. He raised a greasy eyebrow. Gabe could sniff out money like a bloodhound. It was surprising, since his own smell should have covered up everything else. He took a taxi from the bus station, he said. Probably paid it with a 20. Got 6, $7 and change. Somebody expects to live under this roof? He ought to carry his own weight. Am I right, Eddie? Got another message to respond to. Eddie. Ah, the super of the apartment building, looked at me with a twinge of sympathy. Come on, Gabe. Kid just got here. Am I right? Gabe repeated. Eddie scowled into his bowl of pretzels. The other two guys passed gas in harmony. Fine. Took a wad of dollars out of my pocket and just threw the money on the table. I hope you lose. Your report card came, big boy, or brain boy. I wouldn't act so snooty. He just yelled at me. Slammed the door to my room, which really wasn't my room. During school months, it was like Gabe's study. Didn't study anything in there except old car magazines, but he loved shoving my stuff in the closet, leaving his muddy boots on my windowsill, doing his best to make the place smell like his nasty cologne cigars, stale beer. 1 second. I dropped my suitcase on the bed. Home sweet home. Gabe's smell was almost worse than the nightmares about Mrs. Dodds or the sound of that old fruit lady's shears snipping the yarn. But as soon as I thought that, my legs felt weak. I remembered Grover's look of panic, how he made me promise I wouldn't go home without him. A sudden chill rolled through me. Felt like someone, something, was looking for me right now. Maybe pounding its way up the stairs, growing long, horrendous talent. Then I heard my mom's voice. Percy? She opened the bedroom door and my fears melted. My mother can make me feel good just by walking into the room. Her eyes sparkle and change the color in the light. Or and change color in the light. Her smile is as warm as a quilt. She's got a few gray streaks mixed in with her long brown hair, but I've never thought of her as old. She looks at me. It's like she's seeing all the good things about me. None of the bad. Never heard her raise her voice or say an unkind word to anyone. Not even me or Gabe. Oh, Percy. She hugged me tight. Can't believe it. You've grown since Christmas. Her red, white, and blues. Sweet on America uniform smelled like the best things in the world: chocolate, licorice, and all the other stuff she sold at the candy shop in Grand Central. She brought me a huge bag of quote unquote free samples, the way she'd always did when I came. We sat together on the edge of the bed while I tucked the blueberry sour strings. She ran her hand through my hair and demanded to know everything. I didn't put much in my letters, and she didn't mention anything about me getting expelled, but she didn't seem to care about any of that. Was I okay? Was her little boy doing alright? I told her she was smothering me and to lay off and all that, but secretly, I was really, really glad to see her. In one of the other rooms, Gabe yelled, "Say, Sally, how about some bean dip, huh?" I gritted my teeth, and my mom is the nicest lady in the world. She should have been married to a millionaire, not some jerk like Gabe. For her sake, I tried to sound upbeat about my last days at Yancey Academy. I told her I wasn't too down about the expulsion. It lasted almost the whole year this time. I'd I'd made some new friends. I'd done pretty well in Latin. And honestly, the fights hadn't been as bad as the headmaster said. I liked Yancey Academy. I really did. It put such a good spin on the year. I almost convinced myself. Started choking up thinking about Grover, Mr. Brunner. Even Nancy Buffett didn't even seem that bad. Till that trip to the museum. What? My mom asked. Her eyes tugged at my consciousness. Or conscience. But yeah, conscience. Trying to pull out all of the secrets. Did something scare you? No, Mom. I felt bad lying and I wanted to tell her about Mrs. Dodds and the three old ladies with the yarn, but I thought well, would sound stupid. She pursed her lips. She knew I was holding back, but she didn't have to push me. I have a surprise for you, she said. We're going to the beach. My eyes widened. Nantucket? 3 nights. Same cabin. When? She smiled. As soon as I get changed. I couldn't believe it. My mom and I hadn't been to Nantucket the last 2 summers because Gabe said there wasn't enough. Gabe appeared in the doorway and growled, "Bean dip! Sally! Didn't you hear me?" I wanted to punch him, but I met my mom's eyes and I understood she was offering me a deal. Be nice to Gabe for a little while, just until she was ready to leave for Montauk. Then we would get out of here. I was just on my way, honey, she told Gabe. We were just talking about the trip. Gabe's eyes got small. The trip? You mean you were serious about that? I knew it, I muttered. He won't let us go. Of course he will, Mom said evenly. Your stepfather is just worried about money. That's all. Besides, he added, Gabriel won't have to settle for bean dip. Make him enough 7-layer dip for the whole weekend. Guacamole, sour cream, the works. Gabe softened a bit. So the money for your trip, so your clothes, clothes budget, right? Yes, honey, Mother said. You won't take my car anywhere but there and back? Yes, we'll be very careful. Gabe scratched his double chin. Maybe if you hurry with that 7-layer dip. Maybe if the kid apologizes for interrupting my poker game. Maybe if I kick you in your soft spot, thought, make you sing like a soprano for a week. My mom's eyes warned me not to make him mad. Why'd she put up with this guy? I wanted to scream. Why did she care what he thought? Sorry. Really sorry I interrupted your incredibly important poker game. Please go back to it right now, I muttered. Page turn. Gabe's eyes narrowed. He's probably trying to detect sarcasm in my statement. Yeah, whatever, he decided. He went back to his game. Thank you, Percy, my mom said. Once we get to Montauk, we'll talk more about whatever you forgot. Or whatever you've forgotten to tell me, okay? For a moment, I thought I saw anxiety in her eyes. Same fear I'd seen in Grover during the bus ride. As if my mom, too, felt an odd chill in the air. But then her smile returned, and I figured I must have been mistaken. She ruffled my hair and went to make Gabe his 7 layer. Now we're ready. Or an hour later, Gabe took a break from his poker game long enough to watch me lug up my mom's bags to the car. Kept griping and groaning about losing her cooking. More important, his 78 Camaro for the whole weekend. A scratch on this car, brain boy, warned me and loaded the light. Not one little scratch. Like I'd be the one driving. I was 12. But that didn't matter to Gabe. Seagull so much as pooped on his paint job, he'd find a way to blame me. Watching him lumber back toward the apartment building, I got so mad I did something I can't explain. As Gabe reached the doorway, I made the hand gesture seen Grover make on the bus, sort of warding off evil gesture. Clawed a clawed hand over my heart, then a shoving movement toward Gabe. Screen door slammed shut so hard, whacked him on the butt and flying up the stairs as if he'd been shot from a cannon. Maybe it was just the wind or some freak accident with the hinges, but I didn't stay long enough to find out. I got in the Camaro and told my mom to step on it. Our rental cabin was on the south shore, way over at the tip of the little pastel box with faded curtain, half sunken into the dune. There's always sand in the spiders in the cabinets. Most of the time, the sea was too cold to swim in. I loved the place. We'd been going there since I was a baby. My mom had been going there even longer. Never exactly said, but I knew why this became the place she'd met my dad. After we got closer to Montauk, she seemed to grow younger. Years of worries and work disappearing from her face. Her eyes turned to the color of the sea. We got there at sunset, opened up all the cabin windows, and went through our usual cleaning. Walked on the beach, fed blue corn chips to seagulls, munched on blue jelly beans, blue saltwater taffy, and all the other free samples my mom brought home. I guess I should explain the blue food. See, Gabe only had once told my mom there was no such thing. They had this fight, which seemed like a really small thing at the time, but ever since my mom went out of her way, oops, page turn, out of her way to eat blue. She baked blue birthday cakes. She mixed blueberry smoothies. She bought blue corn tortilla chips. Brought home blue candy from the workshop. This, along with keeping her maiden name Jackson, rather than calling herself Mrs. Ugliano, was proof that she wasn't totally suckered Gabe. She did have a rebellious streak, like me. When it got dark, we made a fire, roasted hot dogs and marshmallows. Mom would tell me stories about when she was a kid, back before her parents died in the plane crash. Tell me about the books she wanted to write someday when she had enough money to quit the candy. Eventually, I got the nerve to ask about what was always on my mind on top. My father. My mother's eyes went all misty. Figured she would tell me the same things she always did. But I never got tired of hearing them. He was kind, Percy. Tall, handsome, and powerful, but gentle too. You have his black hair, and his green eyes. Mom fished a blue jelly bean out of her candy bag. I wish she could see you, Percy. Would have been so proud. I wondered how she could say that. What was so great about me? A dyslexic, hyperactive boy with a D+ report card, kicked out of school for the sixth time in 6 years. Oh, how old was I? I mean, when he left. She watched the flames. He was only with me one summer, Percy. Right here, this beach, this cabin. But he knew me as a baby? No, honey. He knew I was expecting a baby, but he never saw you. He had to leave before you were born. I tried to square that the fact that I seem to remember something about my father. A warm glow, smile. I'd always assumed he knew me as a baby. My mom never said it outright. Still, felt like it must be true. Now to be told that he'd never even seen me, felt angry at my father. Maybe it was stupid, but I resented him for going on that ocean voyage, for not having the guts to marry my mom. He left us, and now we were stuck with smelly Gabe. You gonna send me away again? I asked her. To another boarding school? Pulled a marshmallow from the fire. I don't know, honey. Voice was heavy, I think. Her voice was heavy. I think I think we'll have to do something. Is it because you don't want me around? I regretted the words as soon as they were out. My mom's eyes welled with tears. She took my hand, squeezed it tight. Oh, Percy. No, I have to, honey. For your own good. I have to send you away. Her words reminded me of what Mr. Bronner had said. That it was best for me to leave Yancey. Be- because I'm not normal, I said. You say that as if it's a bad thing, Percy. But you don't realize how important you are. That Yancey Academy was far enough away that you'd finally be safe. Safe from what? She met my eyes, and a flood of memories came to me. All the weird, scary things that had ever happened to me, some of which I tried to forget. During third grade, a man in a black trench coat had stalked me on the playground. When the teachers threatened to call the police, he went away growling, but no one believed me when I told them that under his broad brimmed hat, the man only had one eye, right in the middle of his head. Before that, a really early memory, I was in preschool and a teacher accidentally put me down for a nap in a cot that a snake had slithered into. My mom screamed when they came to pick me up and found me playing with a limp, scaly rope. I somehow managed to strangle to death with my with my meaty toddler hands. Every single school, something creepy had happened, something unsafe. I was forced to move. I know I shouldn't tell my mom about the old lady, the fruit stand, about Mrs. Dodds, the art museum, about my weird hallucination that I had sliced my math teacher into dust with a sword, but I couldn't make myself tell her. I had a strange feeling that the news would end our trips to Malaga, and I didn't want that. I tried to keep you as close to me as I can, or as I could, my mom said. They told me that was a mistake, but there's only one other option, Percy. The place your father wanted to send you, and I just can't stand to do it. Not a school, then so summer camp. Was my head was spinning. Why would my dad, who hadn't stayed around long enough to see me be born, talk to my mom about summer camp? It was so important. Why hadn't it ever been mentioned before? Sorry, Percy. She didn't even look in my eyes, but I can't talk about it. I couldn't send you to that place. Hence why good. For good. It was only a summer camp. Turned towards the fire, and I knew from her expression if I asked any more questions, start. Gosh. That night I had a vivid dream. Storming on the beach, and two beautiful animals, a white horse and a golden crab, were trying to kill each other at the edge of the earth. The eagle swooped down and slashed the horse's muzzle with its huge talons. The horse reared up and kicked at the eagle's wings. As they fought, the ground rumbled and a monstrous voice chuckled somewhere beneath the earth, goading the animals to fight harder. I ran towards them, knowing I had to stop them killing each other. I was running. Oh, that makes sense. Uh, I knew I would be too late. Saw the eagle dive down, beak aimed at the horse's wide eyes, and I screamed, "No!" I woke up with a start. That was really storming, kind of storm that cracks trees and blows down houses. There was no horse or eagle on the beach, just lighting, making false daylight, and 21-foot waves pounding into dunes like artillery. Wait, real quick. With the next thunderclap, my mom woke, sat me up, eyes wide, said, "Hurricane." I knew that was crazy. Long Island never sees hurricanes this early in the summer. The ocean seemed to have forgotten. Over the roar of the wind, I heard the distant bellow, an angry, tortured sound that made my hair stand on end. Then a much closer noise, like mallets in the sand. A desperate voice, someone yelling, pounding on our cabin door. My mother sprang out of bed in her nightgown and threw open the lock. Grover stood framed in the doorway against a backdrop of pouring rain. But he wasn't exactly Grover. Searching Searching all night, he gasped. What were you thinking? My mom looked at me in terror, not scared of Grover, but why he'd come. Percy, she said, shouting to be heard over the rain. What happened at school? What didn't you tell me? It's frozen looking at Grover. I couldn't understand. What was I seeing? Ozui kai alothle. Thoy, he yelled. It's right behind me. Didn't you tell her? I was too shocked to register that he just cursed in ancient Greek. I had understood it perfectly. I was too shocked to wonder how Grover had gotten here by himself in the middle of the night because Grover didn't have his pants on. What? Oh, yeah, because Grover didn't have his pants on, and where his legs should be, My mom looked at me sternly and talked in a tone she'd never used before. Percy, tell me now! I stammered about the old ladies and the fruit stand of Mrs. Dodds, and my mom stared at me, her face deathly pale into the flashes of lightning. She grabbed her purse, tossed me my rain jacket, and said, Get to the car. Both of you, go. Grover ran for the Camaro, but he wasn't running exactly. He was trotting, shaking his shaggy hindquarters. Suddenly, his story about the muscular distorter in his legs made sense. I understand how he could run so fast, still limp when he walked, because where his feet should be, there were no feet. There were cloven hooves. Ah, and that is the end of chapter 3, which is pretty good. That would have been a really cool scene to see played out. Would have been really cool to see. Uh the stepdad the stepdad is human. He's just like, as we learned from the movie, he's a disguise. But with my interpretation of this is with Percy not being honest about what all was happening, they basically left Gabe and the safety of everything. And yeah. The Grover, the best friend, showed up, and yeah, he's the satyr. Yeah, I like that. That was a good chapter. But let's see. I think I am going to call it here. I am getting a bit tired, and it is midnight now. And I'm